Louis, I only met yesterday. He is a historian and Austrian economist, and you could not meet anyone more libertarian than Louis, although I suspect that a number of people in this audience will give him a run for his money, his sound money. I met him yesterday for the first time. He's going to talk about the history of money, and it's something which I think is going to be familiar to everyone here. But it leads in very nicely to Rick's talk about introduction to Bitcoin. Rick was the first Bitcoin maxi that I heard in real life, I think back in 21. I'm class of 21. And he absolutely solidified my dawning realization that I had better get out of shitcoins and just focus on Bitcoin only. So I would never have thought at the time that I would be here introducing him now. But let's move straight on to Louis with his history of money.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? I assume so, you're not that many. So, what better way, obviously, to start this mini conference than with the question, what is money? And I'd like to start, next slide please. I'd like to start with this quote, necessity is the mother of invention. And next slide, demand is the mother of invention, which is the same thing, right? So if we go to the next slide, we do take money for granted usually, right? We don't really think about it when we use it, except the fact that we're exchanging money for something else. But money is a technology, and as such it had to be invented, it had to be developed. And it purports to solve a series of problems. Most fundamentally, it's how to move value across time and space, and how to exchange value for value. So the three functions of money, I'm sure everyone knows them here, are medium of exchange, store of value, and unit of account. So we've got two types of basic exchanges. Direct exchange, barter. And so it's simply where we exchange one good for another. It's pretty straightforward. But it's only practical in small societies, right? And this is because the more goods you have in a society, the more services are offered, the more trading pairs you're going to have, and the more difficult it's going to be to actually meet someone face to face that wants what you have to offer. And so we have the problem of lack of coincidence of wants, which I'm going to get into in just a bit. And we also have the problem of diminishing marginal utility, which perhaps is a bit more complex, but maybe we can get into it in the Q&A. Then we have indirect exchange, which arises precisely when society becomes more complex, when more goods are offered, when there is specialization of labor, which implies that you spend your time and energy focused on one particular task, and so you require more needs. You need to actually exchange to cover the rest of your needs. And so we use an intermediary good to transact. That means that we first purchase a good that everyone is going to find desirable, and then we exchange that good for the good that we were seeking in the first place. And then as free economic agents in the free market, really without intervention by the government or anyone else really, start transacting and start looking for media of exchange, there emerges gradually and organically a single one, or at least a very limited subset of media of exchange. So what is money then? Money is a good that is not purchased for consumption, so it's not a consumption good, and it's not purchased for investment or for the production of other goods, and so it is not a capital good. So yeah, it's purchased primarily for the sake of exchange, and as I said before, nothing in principle dictates what should be money. I could use anything right now. I could use this power bank or this cup, give it to someone who actually desired it, and exchange it for something else that I desired, and that would be de facto money. But the main definition of money is usually generally accepted medium of exchange. That's a bit subjective. especially in regards with Bitcoin, but yeah, we can leave it at that. I think anything that another person is willing to accept that I've purchased beforehand to acquire another good qualifies as money. So let's go back to the problem of lack of coincidence of wants, which is basically needs that I want to acquire something, but the other person, the trading pair, actually does not want what I offer. So what do? We have this problem of lack of coincidence of wants, which has three aspects. Lack of coincidence of wants in scales, in time frames, and in locations. So really quickly, I'll just go over them. Scales, imagine you want to buy a house or a boat, and you only have spears to offer, or you have apples, fish, whatever, right? So you're going to need to accumulate so many of them that it's going to become impractical to actually purchase that big valuable good. The second one is time frames. So now imagine those apples. By the time you collect the first unit, right? And by the time you're finished collecting the 200,000th unit, the first one is rotten. So not very practical.
Imagine the fish.
Imagine the fish.
Yeah.
And then location, well, say you want to sell a house for a house, but then the potential buyer does not really like the location of your house. So now you have a problem because that house cannot be moved. So you actually need something that, you need a medium of exchange to solve that you can move. Next slide, please. So that brings us to saleability, which is a concept, I think, invented by Karl Menger, famous economist from the Austrian tradition. And it's that property that allows us to assess whether a good serves the purpose of money, whether it solves for the problem of lack of coincidence of wants. And so we've got saleability across scales, saleability across space, and saleability across time. Saleability across scales means that it can be divided, it can be aggregated pretty easily so that it can match whatever value I want. Saleability across space, I said it before, ease of transportation, and that usually tends to mean that we're going to seek a money that can capture high amount of value in very limited units of weight, or maybe no weight at all. And saleability across time, which is the retention of value into the future. Now, that means first that it should be immune to deterioration, unlike apples and fish. And that will lead it to fulfill the second function of money, which is store of value. And this is actually the key criterion to determine what is sound money, what is hard money. So we've got saleability across time, right, which is a crucial factor. So we've seen durability, immunity to deterioration. That's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Why is it not sufficient? Because if the market chooses a good as money that is easy to produce, then its supply is going to increase very rapidly. And that means that every unit that everyone holds is going to lose its value. It's going to start melting like an ice cube, and you will not be able to afford whatever you want to buy. It may sound familiar lately. And we can distinguish then between hard money and easy money. And the key criterion again is stock to flow ratio, which is how much supply is going to increase relative to existing stock. And it's important to point out, even though I don't do it in the slide, that existing stock is to a certain extent determined as well by the industrial use of that good. So if a good is used a lot in industry, stocks are going to deplete because people want actually to use them as capital goods. So that leads us again to hard money, a money whose supply is very hard to increase, but there's the second aspect, which is stock. It's not only sufficient for supply not to increase rapidly, it's also necessary that people hold it, that there is a high stock. Otherwise, if for any reason there is a high increase in the supply, then the stock won't, the value won't hold if the stock is tiny. The price will devalue. So, as a good is chosen freely, organically, without intervention by the state as money, naturally its demand is going to increase. People are going to want to hold it, people are going to want to store their value in it, and well, naturally everyone wants to be able to transact, and we've seen that money makes transactions easier and calculation easier. So we can see that a good with low stock to flow ratio is going to be unlikely to retain value across time, while a good with high stock to flow ratio is going to be more likely to retain value. Now, this is a little game. How are we on time?
You have another 7 minutes.
Okay, that's good. Actually, I think I'm going to take over here,
Sure.
if you don't mind not seeing me, which I'm sure you don't. All right, so I've got a few different kinds of historical monies, and I want you to help me assess their validity across, their salability across scales, space, and time.
Come
So-
in space.
So, cattle. What do we do with cattle? How is it for scale? Can we divide it? Can we aggregate it?
Not without killing the cow.
Yeah, so that would be meat, right?
Yeah.
That wouldn't be cattle.
Yeah.
So we can aggregate it, but we cannot divide it, right?
Yeah.
What's the salability across space? Can we transport it?
No easy.
Not very easily, but we can
We
herd
can
them.
move it, yeah.
We can herd them. And what's the salability across time?
Not very good.
The
Not very good.
lifespan of a cow.
Exactly. Though they can reproduce, right?
Yeah.
But that also means that its supply increases. So the stock to flow ratio is not very good. So that's my assessment, right? So very bad on scale, I would say. Okay-ish on space, you can actually move them. And on time, not very good. The second one is not rice, it's salt.
Yeah.
I don't know why it looks like rice. What do we do with salt? How is it for scale?
I think it's
Very good, right?
Yeah,
Very good.
It was used as money in the past.
Exactly, yes. These were all used as money at some point. How is it on space? Salability across space?
Yeah.
Excellent, right? We can transport it very easy. And across time?
Well, also good. It's
So that's going to be highly dependent on the technological capacity of the society,
it's a very
right?
humid
Yeah.
place, less so.
Exactly, yes. And there are some places where you cannot produce salt,
Yeah.
so that's going to be a very high stock to flow ratio. So let's give it a very good on scale, very good on space, and okay-ish on time. Were you agreeing so far?
Yeah.
Okay, the third one are wampum seashells.
Okay.
I could have put any other kind of seashell, but they look nice. I like them. Those were used in in North America by Native Americans and also European settlers. They were used from, if I remember correctly, 1631 to 1661, so not very long lived, but it served its purpose. How is it on scale?
I think it's
Good.
It's okay, right? It's okay. They can't be divided because you break them. They're not beautiful anymore, so they lose a bit of value. But they're okay because I can aggregate them, right? How is it on space, across space?
Okay.
I can transport them, similar to salt. I can make jewelry with them. It's very easy to transport. And what's the salability across time?
Yeah. Good.
Okay-ish, because it's the same as salt. As industrialization progresses, as people have more capacity, you can actually deploy the means to extract them very easily. So pretty similar to salt. Probably it's worse on scale, but similar. Then we have rice stones. Rice stones were used in the island of Yap. I can't remember now if it's Micronesia or Micronesia, one of them. Pacific. So there were many scales, so I'm going to help you with this one because I'm not sure if you're familiar. There were many scales, they could be quite small and they could be human size. So scale is like shells, I guess, not very divisible, not quite perfect for that. Across space, well, that's not very good, right? Because it's quite hard to move them. There are smaller ones which you can move, and actually they derive their value by how many men you had to use to move them. So not very good across space. But they were great across time because they're durable. And there is no limestone on Yap. So you actually had to go to Palau or Guam to procure the stone. So that's immense stock-to-flow ratio, right? However, I only give it an okay-ish on stock-to-flow because, again, if you have a boat, if you have the means, you can go to Palau and Guam and actually extract them, which is what happened eventually. Gold and silver, very quickly. Scale, pretty much okay, right? It can be melted, it can be minted, it can be aggregated in bars. Salability across space, it depends, right? Small transactions is very good. And then we have larger transactions which are going to require a lot of logistics. And salability across time, of course, is very great, very great. Why? Not necessarily because the supply does not increase, but because people hold it. There is enormous stock, especially by central banks. Then we have paper money, and I'm going to speed up because I don't have much time left. Paper money with gold, backed by gold. Right, so with the advent of telecommunications, gold becomes very saleable across space because we can now transact claims for gold instead of the gold itself. So it gives it very high salability across space. But interestingly enough, going back to the rice stones, the bigger ones, which were the ones that held value, were not moved. They were displayed at prominent locations, and people transacted claims to the stone. So it's actually very sophisticated, right? And the transaction was made in front of everyone so that the whole community recognized the transaction. May sound familiar. I mean Bitcoin. And then we've got paper money backed by gold, which is great across scale, great across space, great across time, as long as it is backed by gold. And of course, as gold reserves were centralized in the banks, because it just made it more convenient, those banks were then subjugated by central banks, and that means that paper money cannot hold its value. It can be increased virtually for free, well, except for the money and the value of its holders, obviously. And that's the last slide. It's a bit of a spoiler, and it's what I think Bitcoin does. I'm trying to be charitable with gold, but yeah, I think that's what it does. So please keep in mind this last slide for the rest of the talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's Louis. That was really interesting, and I've never quite appreciated the absolute how even more ingenious Satoshi's initial distribution of Bitcoin was, having that massive stock at the very outset. I mean, we see now the benefits of having a smaller supply as we go on through the next 100 years, but the security that it gives actual Bitcoin by having so much already out there from the beginning is utterly ingenious.